Some secrets aren't meant to stay buried, but Noreen Vexley spent 30 years trying anyway. She walked away from everything, her family, her name, the life she knew, and disappeared into the Montana wilderness where no one could find her and no one could ask the questions she couldn't answer. But when spring finally breaks through the mountain ice, Noreen hikes to a remote glacial lake and finds something impossible. A wooden coffin, frozen solid beneath the surface, waiting like the past always does. She breaks through the ice and opens it. What she sees inside drops her to her knees in tears. Because that coffin holds the answer to a crime that was never solved and a secret that cost her everything she loved. What was in that coffin that finally broke a woman who survived alone for 3 decades? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, subscribe because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The cabin sat where the timberline met the sky, a small structure of weathered logs and salvaged tin that had withstood 3 decades of Montana winters. Noreen Vexley woke before dawn, as she always did, to the sound of silence so complete it had its own texture. At 54, her body moved with the deliberate economy of someone who'd learned that wasted motion in the backcountry could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. She dressed in layers, wool against skin, flannel over that, and finally the canvas work jacket that had been patched so many times it was more repair than original fabric. The morning routine never varied. Water from the creek, heated on the wood stove, coffee made strong and black, oatmeal with dried berries she'd gathered the previous fall. She ate standing at the single window, watching the light creep across the valley below, illuminating the patchwork of meadow and forest that had been her entire world for longer than most marriages lasted. The hand-drawn, topographic map on her wall, annotated with her own observations, game trails, seasonal water sources, dangerous crossings, told the story of a woman who knew every fold and feature of this landscape more intimately than most people knew their own neighborhoods. She'd chosen this place carefully when she first arrived, young and terrified and pregnant, with nothing but a backpack and the clothes she wore. The cabin had been abandoned even then, a relic from the logging days, and she'd spent that first brutal winter making it livable, learning to trap, to preserve food, to read weather in the sky and animal behavior, learning, most importantly, to be alone. Noreen Caldwell had died in the spring of 1993. Noreen Vexley had been born in her place, though that name existed on no official document, spoken only in the rare interactions she permitted with the outside world. 4 times a year, she made the 2-day trek down to Timber Ridge, the closest thing to civilization within 100 miles. She traded pelts and herbs for supplies she couldn't make or grow herself: coffee, salt, ammunition, the occasional book. The general store owner, a taciturn man named Harlan, who'd been old when she first arrived and seemed to have stopped aging somewhere around 70, never asked questions. He'd seen plenty of people running from something in his years, manning that counter. Noreen paid in cash she'd carefully hoarded, kept her eyes down, and left before anyone could engage her in conversation. The younger generation had started asking questions, though. Last trip down, there'd been a new face at the ranger station, a woman in her 30s with bright, curious eyes, and the kind of earnest enthusiasm that made Noreen want to disappear into the woods immediately. The ranger had introduced herself as someone or other. Noreen made a point of not remembering names and started asking about trail conditions, wildlife sightings, whether Noreen had considered getting a satellite communicator for emergencies. "I don't have emergencies," Noreen had said, which was true enough. When you lived carefully, respected the wilderness, and made no mistakes, emergencies were rare. She'd broken her ankle once, in the winter of 2008, and had splintered it herself, hobbling through 3 months of healing without complaint or complication. The wilderness rewarded competence and punished carelessness with an impartiality she found more honest than any human judgment. But that was the thing about isolation. It required constant vigilance to maintain. The world had a way of intruding, sending its representatives in the form of well-meaning rangers or hikers who wandered too far off the established trails. Twice in 30 years, she'd found people near her cabin, and both times she'd made it clear through body language and cold courtesy that they weren't welcome. Word had spread among the outdoor community. There was a woman up in the high country who wanted to be left alone. Most people respected that. The wilderness attracted its share of hermits and runaways, after all. What they didn't know, what no one could know, was that Noreen wasn't running from some failed relationship or bankruptcy or midlife crisis. She was running from a crime scene, from a body in the woods and threats made in the dark, and a choice she'd had to make when her daughter was 6 months old, and the world had become too dangerous for both of them to stay in it together. She caught herself touching her collarbone, where a locket had once hung on a silver chain. Gone now, given away the night she'd disappeared, pressed into her younger sister's hands, along with a baby who didn't yet understand that her mother was about to become a ghost. Noreen shook her head, physically dismissing the memory. That was the other skill she'd mastered over 30 years. The ability to shut doors in her mind, to lock away whole rooms of memory and throw away the keys. She'd gotten good at it. Good enough that whole days could pass without her thinking about Lily at all. That was a lie, of course. She thought about Lily every single day, wondered what she looked like, whether she'd inherited Noreen's stubborn streak or her father's easy laugh, whether Stella had told her the truth or some gentler fiction, whether Lily hated her or had simply forgotten her entirely, which somehow seemed worse. The coffee had gone cold in her cup. She dumped it, rinsed the metal mug, and turned her attention to the day's work. Early spring was always the busiest time, checking trap lines, assessing winter damage to the cabin, taking inventory of supplies, and determining what would need to be gathered or hunted in the months ahead. The seasonal rhythms of this life had become so ingrained that she moved through them almost automatically, her body knowing what to do while her mind drifted. Today, though, something felt different. She'd woken with an unfamiliar restlessness, a prickle of unease she couldn't quite name. The forest was too quiet, maybe, or the light was wrong. Or she was just getting old and her instincts were finally starting to fade, worn down by decades of disuse when it came to human intuition. She'd spent so long reading animal behavior and weather patterns that she'd nearly forgotten how to read people, which was fine, since there were no people to read. She gathered her gear, the pack with emergency supplies, the hunting knife her father had given her when she turned 16, the compass she rarely needed anymore. The topographic map she folded and tucked into her inner pocket, more talisman than tool. She was planning to check the upper valley today, a glacial basin she hadn't visited in several years. The thaw came late up there, and it wasn't usually worth the climb until mid-spring, but something was pulling her that direction. The hike took most of the morning. Noreen moved through the forest with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged there, stepping over deadfall without looking, following game trails only she could see. She'd learned to walk the way animals walked, aware, efficient, leaving minimal trace. The elk knew her now, barely raising their heads when she passed. The ravens had stopped scolding her years ago. The valley opened before her just after noon, a bowl of stone and ice cradled between peaks, still heavy with winter snow. The glacial lake at its center had been frozen solid every other time she'd seen it, but today the ice was breaking up, great sheets of it floating like puzzle pieces on water, so clear it looked artificial. The sun caught the surface and threw light in all directions, momentarily blinding. That's when she saw it. At first, Noreen thought it was a log or a boulder, something ordinary. But as she moved closer, shading her eyes against the glare, the shape resolved into something that made no sense. Something rectangular and deliberate, trapped in the ice near the lake's edge where the thaw had started. A wooden coffin. She stood frozen. The irony of the word didn't escape her, staring at the impossible object. There was no way a coffin should be here. No cemetery within 50 miles, no history of habitation in this valley, no logical reason for such a thing to exist in this place. But logic didn't change what her eyes were seeing. The coffin was old, made of rough-hewn planks, darkened by water and time, its edges still rimmed with frost, like something from a fairy tale. It lay perhaps 10 feet from shore, trapped in ice that was melting but hadn't yet released its prize. Noreen's hands were shaking. She clenched them into fists, forced herself to breathe. 30 years of carefully maintained equilibrium shattered in an instant because she recognized that coffin. Not specifically, she'd never seen it before, but she understood what it meant. Someone had put it here. Someone who knew she would come to this valley. Someone who knew exactly who she was and what she'd run from. Her first instinct was to turn around and leave, to pretend she'd never seen it, to go back to her cabin and bar the door and wait for whatever was coming. But she'd spent 3 decades hiding, and apparently that currency had run out. Whatever was in that coffin had been left for her, and ignoring it wouldn't make it go away. She tested the ice carefully before committing her weight, using a fallen branch to check thickness and stability. The surface near the shore was thin, already turning to slush, but farther out it would still hold her if she was careful. She'd lived this long by being careful. The coffin was heavier than she expected, or maybe her hands weren't as strong as they used to be. She had to break away more ice, had to work the wood free from its frozen grip, her fingers going numb in the glacial water. When it finally came loose, she dragged it to shore, breathing hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a long moment, she just stared at it. The lid was held closed by a simple iron latch, rusted but functional. No lock, no barrier, except her own fear. Noreen knelt in the mud and snow and opened the coffin. There was no body inside, just objects carefully arranged, each one a fragment of a past she'd spent 3 decades trying to forget. A tarnished silver locket, her locket, the one she'd given to Stella. A bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth. A small stuffed rabbit, worn and faded, that she'd bought for Lily the week before she was born, her vision blurred. She didn't realize she was crying until the tears fell, spattering on the objects below, and then she couldn't stop. 30 years of suppressed grief hit her all at once, for the friend she'd lost, for the daughter she'd abandoned, for the life she'd fled, and the woman she'd been before. Fear had turned her into something harder and smaller and alone. She knelt there in the mud beside that impossible coffin and wept until her body was empty. Of tears. Until the sun had moved across the sky and the shadows were starting to lengthen. When she finally had the strength to move, she reached into the coffin with trembling hands and lifted out the locket. Inside were 2 photographs, just as she remembered. One was of her and Jolene Marsh, taken during their graduate school days, young and fierce and certain they could change the world. The other was of Lily at 6 months old, all enormous eyes and wispy dark hair. Someone had found this locket. Someone had placed it here, along with these other fragments of her stolen life. Someone knew she existed, knew where she was, and wanted her to know they knew. The question that mattered now was simple: friend or enemy? And the only way to find the answer was to do the one thing she'd sworn she'd never do: go back. Noreen sat beside the coffin as the afternoon light turned golden, unable to leave, unable to fully process what she'd found. The objects inside were arranged with obvious care, each one positioned deliberately. It wasn't random. This was a message. She forced herself to look at everything, to catalogue each item and what it meant. The locket she'd already examined. The stuffed rabbit was exactly as she remembered it. The blue fabric faded to grey, one ear slightly torn. She'd spent a week's worth of grocery money on it, buying it from a toy store in Missoula the month before Lily was born, imagining a future that would never arrive. The bundle of papers, when she unwrapped them, proved to be photographs. Recent photographs. Her breath caught when she saw the first one, a woman in her early 30s standing outside what looked like a law office, dark hair pulled back in a professional twist, wearing a charcoal suit that spoke of competence and success. The woman had Noreen's nose, her father's jaw, and an expression of determined intensity that could have been lifted straight from Noreen's own face. Lily, written on the back in handwriting, she didn't recognize. Your daughter. She's fighting the same fight you ran from. They're coming for her. The words hit like a physical blow. Noreen read them again, then a third time, as if repetition might change their meaning. She turned to the next photograph. This one showed Lily walking to her car, glancing over her shoulder with obvious wariness. Another image caught her entering an office building, this one date-stamped just 3 weeks ago. Someone had been following her daughter, documenting her movements. The photographs weren't threatening in themselves, but the implication was clear. Lily was vulnerable, exposed, in danger. Noreen's hands were steady now, the shock giving way to something colder and more focused. She'd spent 30 years in survival mode, every decision calculated to minimize risk. But this changed everything. Lily wasn't supposed to be part of this. That had been the whole point of leaving, to keep her daughter safe from the people who'd killed Jolene. From the forces, Noreen had been too young and too frightened to fight. But if Lily was in danger anyway, then Noreen's sacrifice had been for nothing. She found more items in the coffin, a yellowed newspaper clipping from July 1993, the paper brittle with age. The headline read, "Graduate student missing following friend's death." The article was brief, stating the facts with journalistic detachment. Jolene Marsh, 24, found dead near an abandoned mining site in Sanders County. Suspected accidental fall. Noreen Caldwell, 23, vanished the same week, leaving behind an infant daughter. Police sought her for questioning but found no trace. The article noted that authorities didn't suspect foul play in Marsh's death, though friends reported the two women had been researching environmental concerns at local mining operations. Environmental concerns. That was one way to put it. What they'd actually uncovered was systematic, illegal dumping of toxic waste, deliberate contamination of water sources, and a paper trail of payoffs and threats designed to keep anyone from asking questions. Jolene had wanted to go public immediately. Noreen had counseled patience, more documentation, building an airtight case. They'd argued about it the night before Jolene died. Noreen remembered that argument with painful clarity. They'd been in Jolene's apartment, surrounded by samples and photographs and field reports. Jolene pacing, electric with righteous anger. Noreen trying to be the voice of reason, suggesting they needed legal counsel, needed to be strategic. People are getting sick, Jolene had said. Kids are getting sick. Every day we wait is another day that company poisons the water. I can't live with that, Noreen. Can you? 12 hours later, Jolene was dead. And 6 hours after that, Noreen had received a visit from a man named Gordon Latimer, head of security for Intermountain Resources, the company they'd been investigating. He'd been polite, almost friendly, expressed his condolences about Jolene's tragic accident, mentioned, casually, that accidents seemed to happen a lot to people who asked the wrong questions, mentioned, even more casually, that Noreen had a baby daughter, and what a shame it would be if something happened to her. The threat had been oblique, but unmistakable. Noreen had 24 hours to disappear. In exchange, Lily would be safe. If Noreen went to the police, if she tried to expose what they'd found, if she did anything except vanish completely, well, accidents could happen to babies too. House fires, car crashes, crib death. So many ways for terrible things to happen. So she'd run, taken Lily to her sister's house, pressed the locket into Stella's hands along with what cash she had, and walked away before dawn. She'd headed into the mountains with the vague plan of disappearing for a few months until things cooled down, maybe finding a way to send for Lily once it was safe. But it had never been safe. And months had turned into years, and years into decades, and somewhere along the way, Noreen had accepted that this was her life, now, alone, anonymous, alive only because she'd chosen silence over justice. Now someone was dragging it all back to the surface. But who? And why now? She examined the coffin itself, looking for any clue about its origin. The wood was weathered but not ancient, maybe 30 or 40 years old. The construction was rough but functional, the kind of thing someone might build for a specific purpose rather than purchase. There were no markings, no manufacturer's stamp, nothing to indicate where it had come from. But getting it here would have required significant effort. This valley was remote, accessible only on foot, and the coffin was heavy. Someone had carried or dragged it up here, deliberately placed it in the lake before the final freeze of winter, knowing that Noreen would find it when the ice broke in spring. Someone who understood her habits. Someone who'd been watching her. The thought sent ice down her spine. She'd been so careful for so long, and she'd believed herself invisible. But surveillance had changed since 1993. Satellite imagery, trail cameras, GPS tracking. A person didn't need to follow you physically anymore to know where you went. Noreen looked around the valley with new eyes, scanning the ridgelines and tree cover for any sign of observation. She saw nothing, but that meant little. If someone had invested this much effort into sending her a message, they were good at not being seen. She made herself think tactically, the way she'd learned to think about predators and weather patterns. What did she know? Someone had her locket, which meant they'd been in contact with Stella or had somehow obtained it from her. Someone had recent photographs of Lily, which meant they were monitoring her daughter. Someone knew about the coffin's location and Noreen's patterns well enough to predict she'd find it, and someone wanted her to know that Lily was in danger. The message was clear. Come out of hiding, or watch your daughter face the consequences of battles you started and never finished. Noreen stood, her joints protesting after sitting so long in the cold. She needed to get back to her cabin, needed to think, needed to figure out her next move. But as she turned to leave, something in the coffin caught the light, a small object she'd missed in her initial examination, tucked into the corner beneath where the photographs had been. She reached in and pulled out a cell phone, not a smartphone, one of the old flip phones that could last a week on a single charge. It was in a waterproof case, still functional despite its time in the cold. She opened it. The screen came to life, showing a full battery and a single saved number with no name attached. As she stared at it, the phone rang. Noreen nearly dropped it. In 30 years, she hadn't heard a phone ring, hadn't spoken to anyone except in the briefest exchanges during her supply runs. The sound was jarring, intrusive, dragging the entire modern world into her carefully preserved isolation. She answered it. "Hello, Noreen." The voice was female, aged, familiar in a way that made her chest constrict. "I know you thought I was dead. We need to talk." The phone fell from Noreen's nerveless fingers, landing in the mud beside the coffin. Because she knew that voice, would have known it anywhere. Despite 30 years of silence, Jolene Marsh wasn't dead. And everything Noreen had believed about that terrible spring, everything she'd run from, every sacrifice she'd made, all of it was based on a lie. Noreen snatched the phone from the mud, her heart hammering so hard she could barely hear over the rush of blood in her ears. Jolene? But the line was dead. Whether Jolene had hung up or the connection had simply failed, Noreen couldn't tell. She tried calling back, pressing the button to redial. But nothing happened. The phone showed full signal strength, which was impossible this far into the backcountry, but the call wouldn't go through. She stood there holding the phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Jolene's voice. Older, rougher, but unmistakably hers. The same voice that had argued with her about strategy, that had laughed at bad jokes over cheap pizza in their shared apartment, that had cooed at baby Lily with such tenderness it had made Noreen's heart ache. Jolene, who she'd mourned for 30 years. Jolene, whose death had shaped every decision Noreen had made since. Jolene, alive. The implications crashed over her in waves. If Jolene had survived, why had she never made contact? Why let Noreen believe she was dead? Why let her spend 3 decades in exile, raising a daughter alone? No, not even that. Letting Stella raise a daughter while Noreen hid in the mountains like a criminal. And if Jolene was alive, who had died? The body they'd found at the mining site. The one identified as Jolene Marsh. Who was that? Noreen looked at the coffin, at the scattered objects, at the phone in her hand. This wasn't closure. This was a door opening onto 30 years of questions she'd never known to ask. She gathered everything quickly, shoving the photographs and papers into her pack, along with the locket and the stuffed rabbit. The coffin she left where it was no point trying to carry it out, and besides, she had a feeling whoever had placed it here would know she'd found it. They'd been watching her after all. Maybe they were watching her right now. The hike back to her cabin took half the time it had that morning. Noreen moved with purpose now, the shock giving way to a familiar focus. She'd survived in the wilderness this long by staying alert, by trusting her instincts when something felt wrong, and everything about this situation felt wrong. She reached her cabin just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. The structure looked exactly as she'd left it. Door closed, windows dark, no obvious signs of disturbance. But as she approached, she noticed small details that made her stop 20 yards away. A boot print in the mud near her woodpile that wasn't hers, slightly too large, tread pattern unfamiliar. A raven perched on her roof that took flight when it saw her, which was unusual. The ravens here knew her, trusted her presence. Someone had been here. Noreen circled the cabin slowly, checking for other signs. The back window showed scrape marks on the sill, as if someone had tested whether it was locked. Her cache of firewood had been disturbed, logs restacked in a slightly different pattern. These were subtle things, details most people would never notice. But she'd spent 30 years paying attention to small changes, to any sign that her isolation had been compromised. She approached the door with her knife drawn, even though she suspected whoever had been here was long gone. The door was unlocked. She rarely locked it, since any determined person could break in anyway, and animals didn't use doors. Inside, everything appeared normal, at first glance. But there, on her small wooden table, was something that definitely hadn't been there when she left. A yellowed newspaper clipping, carefully placed where she couldn't miss it. The same article she'd found in the coffin, but this was clearly the original. No waterlogging, no ice damage. Just aged paper and faded ink. Beneath it was a handwritten note on what looked like a page torn from a journal. They never stopped looking for you. They never stopped trying to cover it up. And now they know Lily is asking the same questions. She needs you, whether she knows it or not. Noreen sat heavily on her single chair, staring at the note. The handwriting was Jolene's. She'd recognize those sharp, slanted letters anywhere. But the message raised more questions than it answered. Who were they? Gordon Latimer and Intermountain Resources, presumably, though she'd learned years ago that the company had changed names at least twice since the 90s. How did they know about Lily? And what questions was Lily asking? She looked at the photograph again, the one of her daughter outside the law office. She's fighting the same fight you ran from. What did that mean? Had Lily somehow stumbled onto the same evidence she and Jolene had uncovered 3 decades ago? Or was she investigating something new that connected to the old crimes? The thought of Lily in danger made Noreen's chest constrict. She'd given up everything to keep her daughter safe, her identity, her career, her family, her entire life. She'd accepted loneliness and exile as the price of Lily's survival. And if Lily was threatened anyway, if all that sacrifice had been for nothing, then Noreen needed to do the one thing she'd sworn she'd never do. She needed to go back. But going back meant exposure. It meant the people who'd threatened her 30 years ago would know she'd surfaced. It meant putting herself directly in their crosshairs, and she wasn't the young, naive graduate student she'd been in 1993. She was 54, out of practice with human interaction, with no allies and no resources except the skills she'd learned surviving in the wilderness. Still, she'd faced down bears, survived blizzards, endured injuries that would have killed a less determined person. She'd lived for 3 decades on her wits and her will. If she could survive the Montana backcountry alone, she could survive whatever came next. First, though, she needed information. She needed to know what Lily was doing, who was threatening her, and where Jolene had been all these years. She needed to understand the full picture before she made any moves. Noreen looked at the cell phone again. No new calls, no messages, but the device itself was a connection to the outside world she hadn't had in 30 years. If Jolene had given her the phone, she must want Noreen to use it. But for what? And when would Jolene call again? As if in answer, the phone buzzed in her hand. Not a call this time, a text message. The first she'd ever received. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Same frequency. I'll explain everything. Trust no one else. Delete this message. J. Noreen stared at the words until they blurred. Trust no one else. That had been her operating principle for 30 years. But now she had to add a new element to that equation. Trust Jolene, who had apparently been alive this entire time and had chosen not to reach out until now. Why wait? Why let Noreen believe she was dead for 3 decades? What had Jolene been doing all this time? And why surface now, putting both of them at risk? She deleted the message as instructed and sat in her cabin as darkness fell, not bothering to light the lamp. 30 years of questions pressed against her skull, demanding answers she didn't have. But one thing was clear. Her life of isolation was over. Whether she wanted it or not, the past had found her. And tomorrow morning, she'd finally learn the truth. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the tin roof and whistling through the gaps in the walls. Noreen barely noticed. She was already planning her next moves, already becoming someone she'd thought was dead and buried. Noreen Caldwell, the woman who'd wanted to change the world, before the world had taught her that some fights cost more than you could afford to pay. But if Lily was in danger, the cost didn't matter anymore. Noreen didn't sleep. She sat by the window through the long night, watching stars wheel across the sky, the phone clutched in her hand. Every sound made her tense. The scrabble of a mouse in the walls, the distant call of an owl, the settling of timbers as temperature dropped. Sounds she'd heard thousands of times before, but tonight they felt different, threatening, as if her cabin had stopped being a sanctuary and become a trap. At exactly 8 o'clock, as the first grey light of dawn touched the eastern ridgeline, the phone rang. "I'm here," Noreen said, not bothering with hello. "Good." Jolene's voice sounded clearer this time, though still rough, aged by time and whatever she'd endured. "I imagine you have questions." "You could say that." Noreen kept her voice level despite the anger building beneath her sternum. "Starting with why you let me think you were dead for 30 years. Because I was supposed to be dead. We both were." Jolene paused, and Noreen heard what might have been a cough or a bitter laugh. "They tried to kill me that night at the mining site. Hit me hard enough that I should have died. But I'm stubborn, as you might remember. I woke up in a hospital 3 days later with no ID, no memory of the first 48 hours, and enough sense to know that if anyone realized I'd survived, they'd finish the job. So you hid. Same as you, different mountains, different name. I've been living in the Bitterroot Range for 28 years, watching, waiting, gathering evidence. Because the company that tried to silence us, they never stopped, Noreen. They just got better at covering their tracks." Noreen closed her eyes. "And Lily, your daughter is an environmental lawyer. She works for a non-profit called Western Justice Initiative. Smart, fierce, doesn't back down from a fight. Reminds me of someone." The warmth in Jolene's voice was unmistakable. "She's been investigating Silver Peak Resources, that's what they're calling themselves now. Same company, new name, same poison in the ground. and she's getting close to something big. Close enough that they've noticed her. How close? Close enough that someone broke into her office last month. Close enough that she's been followed. Close enough that I couldn't stay hidden anymore, because if anything happens to her, Jolene's voice cracked. I couldn't save you 30 years ago. I couldn't save myself. But maybe I can save her. We can save her. Together. Noreen felt tears burning behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. You should have contacted me before now. I know, believe me, I know, but I thought. Jolene exhaled slowly. I thought you'd built a life somewhere. I thought maybe you'd found peace, or at least safety. I didn't want to drag you back into this unless I had to, and now I have to. Where are you? That's need to know, and you don't need to know yet. What you need to know is that Lily doesn't know you're alive. Stella raised her, told her you had died in the mountains shortly after leaving. Stella thought it was kinder than the truth. The words hit like a physical blow. Dead. Lily thought she was dead. Not missing, not absent by choice, but gone. And somehow that was worse than anything Noreen had imagined. I need to talk to Stella, she said. I figured you would. That's why I'm calling early. Give you time to work up the courage. Jolene's voice softened. She's going to be angry, Noreen. But she's also going to be relieved. Make the call. The line went dead. Noreen stared at the phone, at the number Jolene had somehow programmed in before leaving it in the coffin. Just one entry. S. Caldwell. Her baby sister, who'd be what? 49 now? Who'd raised Lily as her own, who'd kept Noreen's secrets, who'd lived with the weight of lies for 3 decades. She dialed before she could talk herself out of it. The phone rang 4 times. Noreen was about to hang up, convincing herself it was a sign, when someone answered. Hello? The voice was cautious, uncertain. Noreen would have known it anywhere, Stella, older but still fundamentally herself. Stella, it's me. Silence, then, no. It's Noreen. I'm alive. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. This isn't funny. Whoever you are, this is cruel and sick, and you were 12 when I left. You were wearing your school softball uniform. It had grass stains on the knees, because you always slid into bases, even though the coach told you not to. You cried when I handed you Lily. You said, "Don't go, Nori," which is what you called me when you were little and couldn't pronounce my full name. You said it would be okay. We'd figure it out together. But I told you I had to leave to keep you both safe. And the last thing I said to you was, tell her I love her every single day. Stella's voice broke on the words. Oh my God, Noreen, is it really you? It's really me. The sound Stella made was somewhere between a sob and a laugh. 30 years. And you're just calling like it's nothing? It's not nothing. Stella, I had to stay hidden. I had to keep you and Lily safe. Safe from what? No, wait, don't tell me over the phone. Where are you? Are you okay? Are you hurt? The questions came rapid fire, classic Stella, needing to catalogue and organize information, even in moments of crisis. It made Noreen smile despite everything. I'm okay. I'm in Montana, about 100 miles from where I disappeared. I've been here the whole time. The whole time. Stella's voice went flat. You've been 100 miles away for 30 years and never contacted us? I couldn't. The people who killed Jolene. Jolene is dead, Noreen. I went to her funeral. The woman you buried wasn't Jolene. She's alive. She called me. That's why I'm calling you now. Because apparently everything I thought I knew was wrong, and apparently Lily is in danger, and I need you to tell me what's happening. Another silence. Longer this time. When Stella spoke again, her voice was steady, controlled the voice of someone who'd had to be strong for a long time. Lily is an environmental lawyer. She's brilliant, driven, and she's investigating a mining company called Silver Peak Resources. She thinks they're responsible for contamination that's causing cancer clusters in 3 counties. She's been threatened, had her car vandalized, her office broken into. She won't stop. Won't back down. She's exactly like you. She thinks I'm dead. I told her you died when she was 2. I thought it would be easier than explaining that you'd abandoned her. I'm sorry. I did what I thought was right. You did what I asked you to do." Noreen swallowed hard. Does she look like me? She has your eyes, your stubbornness, your need to fix things that are broken, even when it costs her. Stella's voice softened. She's a good person, Nori. You'd be proud of her. I need to see her. I need to warn her. She's not going to believe you're real. She's going to be angry. She's going to have questions you might not be able to answer. I know. And if you do this, if you come back, there's no undoing it. You can't disappear again. You can't leave her twice. Noreen looked around her cabin at the life she'd built from fear and necessity. 30 years of isolation. 30 years of safety purchased at the cost of everything else. But if Lily was in danger, none of it mattered. "I'm not disappearing again," she said. "I'm coming home, or whatever's left of it. I need to prepare. I need to—" She paused. "I need to figure out how to be a person again, how to exist in the world. It's been a long time. Take whatever time you need. But Noreen, don't take 30 years. After they hung up, Noreen sat in her cabin as morning light filled the valley. Outside, the world was waking up, birds calling, wind moving through the pines, the creek running high with snowmelt, all the sounds she'd wrapped around herself like armor. She was going to leave it all behind, and this time she was going to face whatever came next, not as Noreen Vexley the hermit, but as Noreen Caldwell the mother, the scientist, the witness, the woman who'd run once but wouldn't run again. The journey out of the backcountry took 2 days, though Noreen could have made it in 1 if she'd pushed hard. But she found herself moving slowly, as if her body resisted every step toward civilization. Each mile away from her cabin felt like shedding a layer of armor, leaving her more exposed, more vulnerable. She noticed the surveillance on the second morning. Noreen had camped in a narrow valley she'd used dozens of times over the years, a sheltered spot where a rock overhang provided natural protection. She'd built a small fire, made coffee, and was rolling up her sleeping gear when she spotted them boot prints in the soft earth near the creek, no more than a day old. Someone had been here recently. Someone who'd stopped at the same place she always stopped, as if following a route they knew she'd take. She studied the prints carefully. Size 11 or 12, deep tread consistent with tactical or hiking boots. The stride length suggested someone tall, moving with confidence, not worried about being tracked, which meant either they were very good or they wanted her to know they were there. Noreen adjusted her route, taking a longer path that kept to rockier ground where tracks would be harder to spot. She moved more cautiously now, pausing frequently to listen, to watch for any sign of pursuit. But she saw nothing. Whoever had been following her had either fallen back or gotten ahead. By the time she reached the outskirts of Timber Ridge, she was exhausted from hypervigilance and lack of sleep. The town looked exactly as she remembered. From her last supply run 6 weeks ago, a handful of buildings clustered around a single main street, pickup trucks, angle parked in front of the general store, mountains looming on all sides. Population 300 on a good day, most of them people who'd moved to Montana specifically to get away from other people. She'd arranged to meet Stella here, in the parking lot of the only motel in town. Neutral ground, public enough to be safe, private enough to talk. As Noreen approached, she saw an unfamiliar car, a sensible sedan that screamed city person trying to blend in, and a woman leaning against it, arms crossed, scanning the street with obvious anxiety. Stella. Except Stella wasn't 12 anymore. She was a woman approaching 50, her hair showing threads of grey, her face lined with the kind of worry that came from raising someone else's child while carrying secrets too heavy to share. She wore jeans and a practical jacket, but something in her posture spoke of a life lived mostly indoors, mostly safe, mostly far from wilderness. Their eyes met. Stella's hand flew to her mouth. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Stella was crossing the parking lot, and Noreen was walking toward her, and they collided in an embrace that felt like drowning and surfacing at the same time. "You're real," Stella whispered against Noreen's shoulder. "You're actually real. I was afraid I'd imagined the call, that I'd finally lost my mind from keeping your secrets. I'm sorry," Noreen said, because it was the only thing she could say, even though the words were inadequate for 30 years of absence. "Don't," Stella pulled back, gripping Noreen's shoulders. "Don't apologize. Not yet. First, let me look at you." She studied Noreen's face with the intensity of someone memorizing a stranger, and Noreen realized that's what they were to each other now, strangers who shared blood and history, but nothing else. The girl Stella had known at 12 bore little resemblance to the weathered woman standing before her now. "You look like a mountain person," Stella said finally. "Lean, hard, like you've been carved out of the landscape." "I suppose I have been." Noreen glanced around. "We should talk somewhere private. I got us a room." Stella gestured to the motel. "It's not much, but it's got walls and a door that locks. That's about all I can say for it." The room was exactly what Noreen expected. 2 double beds with floral bedspreads that had seen better decades, a television that probably only got 3 channels, industrial carpet that smelled faintly of cleaning chemicals and old cigarettes. But it had walls and a door, as Stella had promised, and when Stella locked that door behind them, Noreen felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the illusion of safety. "Tell me everything," Stella said, sitting on one of the beds. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." "So," Noreen told her, "about the night Jolene died or didn't die, about Gordon Latimer's visit and his threats, about the decision to disappear, to protect Lily by erasing herself from existence, about 30 years alone in the mountains, about the coffin in the glacial lake, about Jolene's phone call." Stella listened without interrupting, her face cycling through shock, anger, understanding, and grief. When Noreen finished, they sat in silence for a long moment. "I need to show you something," Stella said finally. She pulled out her phone. The technology still looked alien to Noreen after so long without it, and navigated to what appeared to be a photo album. "This is Lily." The images showed a woman's life in fragments. Childhood photos of a serious girl with dark braids and overalls, teenage years marked by academic awards and debate team, pictures, college graduation in cap and gown, professional headshots. Each image showed the same determined expression, the same intelligent eyes. "She graduated top of her class from University of Montana Law," Stella said softly. "She could have worked anywhere, made a fortune in corporate law. But she chose environmental justice. Said she wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. She's like Jolene," Noreen said. "She's like you both." Stella swiped to a more recent photo. This was taken last month at a community meeting. She was presenting evidence about contamination from Silver Peak Resources. That man in the background, Noreen's blood went cold. The man Stella indicated was older now, hair gone silver, face heavier, but unmistakable. Gordon Latimer, standing in the crowd, watching Lily, with the same predatory focus he'd turned on Noreen 30 years ago. He was at her presentation. He showed up, didn't say anything, just stood there watching. Lily said it made her uncomfortable, but she didn't know who he was. "I did." Stella's voice hardened. "I remembered his face from the news coverage of Jolene's death. He was quoted as a company spokesman, expressing condolences, saying how tragic it all was. I've seen that face in my nightmares for 3 decades. Noreen took the phone, studying the image. "He knows who Lily is. He knows she's mine. That's what I'm afraid of. The pattern is repeating, Noreen. Lily has evidence. She's about to go public. And now he's watching her the same way he must have watched you and Jolene." "Not quite the same." Noreen's voice was cold, flat, "because this time I'm not a frightened 23-year-old. And this time I'm not running. Stella reached into her bag and pulled out a manila envelope. "There's something else you need to see. Lily's been compiling a file on Silver Peak. She's meticulous, documents everything. I made copies of some of her research. You need to understand what she's up against." Inside the envelope was a corporate ID badge, the plastic worn from use. The photo showed Gordon Latimer, perhaps 10 years younger, and the text read, "Gordon Latimer, VP of Operations, Silver Peak Resources." "He's still there," Noreen said. "After everything, he's still there, still in power, and still covering up the same crimes." Lily's found evidence of contamination in 5 different counties: cancer clusters, birth defects, livestock deaths. The company's been paying people off, burying test results, intimidating anyone who asks questions. It's exactly what you and Jolene uncovered, except now it's spread across half of Montana. The ID badge, her mind cycling through options and consequences. If she confronted Latimer directly, she'd be putting herself at risk. But if she did nothing, Lily would face the same threats that had cost Noreen everything. There had to be another way. Someone who could help, someone with resources and connections that Noreen and Lily lacked. Someone who'd been tracking this story for 30 years and hadn't given up. "I need to talk to Malcolm Torrey," she said. Malcolm Torrey had aged the way journalists often did, carrying the weight of stories no one wanted to hear, evidence no one wanted to see. He sat across from Noreen in the back booth of a diner on the edge of town, studying her face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to trust easy answers. "You know," he said finally, "I'd started to think you were a ghost story, the environmental scientist who vanished. Every few years someone would report seeing a woman matching your description up in the high country, but by the time anyone checked, there was never any trace." "I'm good at not being found," Noreen said. "That's one way to put it." Malcolm took a sip of coffee that had probably been sitting on the burner too long. "Stella said you needed to talk to me about Jolene Marsh. That's a name I haven't heard in a while." "Well, that's not true. I think about her every damn day. She's alive." Malcolm's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down carefully, as if sudden movements might shatter something fragile. "Come again?" "Jolene Marsh is alive. She called me. That's why I'm here, why I came out of hiding. Because she's alive, and my daughter is in danger, and apparently everything I thought I knew about that spring was wrong." "Jesus Christ," Malcolm scrubbed a hand over his face. "Jesus Christ. Do you have any idea what that means, what that changes?" "Some of it. That's why I need your help. Stella said you covered the story back then, that you've been tracking Silver Peak for years. I need to know what you know." Malcolm glanced around the diner empty, except for a waitress reading a magazine at the counter, and leaned forward. "I've been investigating that company for 32 years. Started when I was a cub reporter, got my first real byline, covering complaints from ranchers about dead livestock and contaminated water. The company was called Intermountain Resources back then. They were supposed to be mining copper, but what they were really doing was dumping toxic waste wherever it was convenient. That's what Jolene and I found," Noreen said. "We had samples, photographs, documentation." "I know. Jolene gave me copies the day before the incident at the mining site. Said it was insurance. Said if anything happened to her, I should make sure the evidence got out." Malcolm's jaw tightened. "When she died, I tried. Wrote the story, submitted it to every outlet I could find. No one would touch it. Company had too. Many connections. Too much money. Too many lawyers. And without Jolene to corroborate, without you to testify, it was just allegations without proof. What happened to the evidence? I kept it. 30 years. I've had it in a safety deposit box, waiting. Waiting for what? I'm not sure. Justice? Vindication? Maybe just waiting for you to come back." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small key. "There's something else Jolene gave me. Something I never told anyone about because I wasn't sure what it meant or if it was safe to use. What is it? An audio recording. Cassette tape, remember those? She recorded it the night before she died. Her voice, naming names, outlining evidence, documenting specific locations of illegal dumping. She was smart enough to know they might come after her. She wanted insurance. Noreen's hands were shaking. I need to hear it. I figured you would. That's why I brought this. Malcolm pulled out an old cassette player, the kind that had been obsolete for 2 decades. I keep it in working order. Call it journalist's paranoia or sentimentality, I'm not sure which. He inserted a tape and pressed play. For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then Jolene's voice emerged, younger than the woman who'd called Noreen, but unmistakably hers, strong, clear, fearless. This is Jolene Marsh, recording on April 12th, 1993 at 11:47 p.m. If you're listening to this, something has probably happened to me. I want to make sure the truth doesn't die with me. Noreen closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks as Jolene spoke. She outlined everything they'd discovered. The systematic contamination of groundwater near the mining operations, the falsified environmental reports, the payoffs to county officials. She named Gordon Latimer specifically, describing threats he'd made, documenting meetings where he'd ordered employees to bury evidence. She provided GPS coordinates for dumping sites, named other company. Officials involved in the cover-up detailed the network of corruption that protected intermountain resources. The contamination is causing real harm, Jolene's recorded voice said. We've documented elevated cancer rates in 3 communities, downstream from the mining operations, birth defects, livestock deaths, and the company knows. They've known for at least 5 years, and they've chosen profit over people's lives. Someone needs to stop them. If it can't be me, if something happens before I can finish this work, then I hope someone else will pick up where I left off. The recording ended with a click. The diner seemed unnaturally quiet after Jolene's voice faded. That's powerful evidence, Noreen said finally. It would have been 30 years ago. Today? Malcolm shrugged. Companies change names twice. Most of the officials she named are dead or retired. Latimer's still there, but he's got lawyers who'd tie this up in court for a decade. And an audio tape from 1993 isn't exactly compelling in the age of deepfakes and AI. But it's the truth. Truth and justice aren't the same thing. I learned that the hard way. Malcolm pocketed the tape player. What we need is current evidence, fresh documentation that shows the pattern continuing, someone on the inside who can corroborate the historical claims with contemporary data. Someone like Lily. Your daughter's been doing remarkable work. She's meticulous, careful, doesn't make claims she can't support. She's got documentation of contamination in 5 counties, all of it downstream from Silver Peak operations. She's traced shell companies and front organizations. She's interviewed victims, collected medical records, assembled a case that would make any prosecutor drool. Malcolm met Noreen's eyes. But she doesn't know what she's up against. She thinks this is about corporate negligence and environmental violations. She doesn't know about the violence, the threats, the willingness to kill witnesses. Because no one told her. Because she thinks I'm dead, and Jolene is dead, and there's no one left who knows the full story. That changes now. If Jolene's alive, if you're back, if we can connect the historical evidence to Lily's current investigation, we might finally have enough to bring Silver Peak down. But we need to be smart about it. We need to coordinate, to make sure we're protected before we make any moves. How? Malcolm pulled out his phone and showed her a series of emails, all from an anonymous account sent over the past several years. Someone's been feeding information to environmental groups, technical data, internal memos, evidence of ongoing contamination. The emails are encrypted, routed through VPNs, impossible to trace, but the writing style, the technical knowledge, the specific focus on Silver Peak. He looked at Noreen meaningfully. I think your friend Jolene has been fighting this battle from the shadows, and if we can find her, if we can bring her evidence together with Lily's documentation and the historical record, we might finally have enough to make this stick. Where is she? The emails come from different locations, but there's a pattern. They're always sent from remote areas of the Bitterroot Range. If I had to guess, I'd say your friend has been living up there, much like you've been living in the backcountry. Watching, waiting, gathering evidence. Noreen thought about the coffin in the glacial lake, about the careful staging of objects designed to bring her out of hiding. She left me a trail, artifacts that would lead me here, force me to confront what I'd run from. She wanted me to find you, to connect with Stella, to understand that Lily needs protection. Then we follow the trail. We find Jolene, we coordinate with Lily, and we take everything we've got past and present, and we make it public in a way they can't bury. Media coverage, legal action, public pressure. We don't give them room to threaten witnesses or hide evidence. And Latimer? Malcolm's expression hardened. Latimer's been untouchable for 3 decades because people like me couldn't prove what we knew. But if we can tie him directly to the historical crimes and show he's continued the same practices, he goes down. All of them go down. When do we start? Now. Right now. Because if Latimer knows you're back, if he suspects Jolene is alive, the clock is ticking, he's already watching Lily. We need to move before he decides she's become too much of a threat. Noreen stood, her body thrumming with purpose for the first time in 30 years. She'd spent decades in exile, hiding from a fight she'd thought was over. But the fight had never ended. It had just been waiting for her to come back and finish it. Stella's house sat on the outskirts of Missoula, a modest ranch-style home with a well-tended garden and a porch swing that creaked in the breeze. Looking at it, Noreen could see 30 years of her daughter's life compressed into small details. A basketball hoop on the garage, faded now but still standing. Flower beds that suggested someone who cared about making things grow. A mailbox painted with cheerful colors that spoke of a childhood lived here, roots put down in soil Noreen had never touched. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, unable to make herself move closer. Behind her, Malcolm waited in his car, giving her space but staying close in case she needed support or an escape route. "You can do this," Stella said quietly. She'd driven separately, had arrived early to prepare Lily for what was coming. She's inside, she's angry, confused, and probably terrified, but she's also curious. She's a lawyer, she wants to hear evidence before making judgments. What did you tell her? The truth, that you're alive, that you've been hiding for 30 years, and that you're here because she's in danger. Stella squeezed Noreen's arm. I didn't tell her about Jolene. That should come from you. And I didn't tell her all the details about why you left, just that you had no choice. How did she take it? About how you'd expect? She threw a coffee mug at the wall, cried for 20 minutes, then pulled herself together and started asking questions I couldn't answer. Said she needed to see you in person, needed to verify this wasn't some elaborate hoax or mistake. Stella's voice softened. She's scared, Nori. Not just of Silver Peak. Of hoping you're real and finding out you're not. Noreen nodded, not trusting her voice. Together, they walked to the front door. Lily was standing in the living room when they entered, arms crossed, posture defensive. She was tall, taller than Noreen, with her father's height, and carried herself with the kind of rigid control that came from years of professional courtrooms. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her face bare of makeup, and her eyes, Noreen's eyes, staring back at her. From a stranger's face were red-rimmed from crying but hard with anger. For a long moment, no one spoke. Noreen couldn't find words adequate for the moment. How do you greet the daughter you abandoned 30 years ago? How do you bridge that chasm? So you're real, Lily said finally. Her voice was level, controlled, with rage simmering underneath. Stella wasn't having a breakdown or being scammed. You're actually here, actually alive, actually my mother who's been dead for 3 decades, except you weren't dead, you were just what, hiding in the mountains? Living your best hermit life while I grew up without you? Lily, Stella started, but Lily cut her off with a sharp gesture. No, I need to hear this from her. She took a step toward Noreen. You left me. I was 6 months old and you left me. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? Growing up knowing your mother chose to disappear rather than stay with you? I didn't choose to disappear, Noreen said, quietly. I chose to keep you alive. That's what Stella said. That you were protecting me from some threat, some danger. But 30 years. You couldn't send a letter, make a phone call, let me know you existed. If I'd made contact, they would have known, and if they'd known, you would have been a target. As long as I stayed dead, you were safe. Safe from who? Safe from what? Lily's voice rose. Because from where I'm standing, I'm being followed, my office has been broken into, and someone's been threatening me for the past 2 months. So whatever you thought you were protecting me from, it didn't work. The words landed like physical blows. Noreen felt Stella's hand on her arm, steadying her. That's why I came back. Because you're in danger, and this time I'm not running. How heroic, Lily's voice dripped with sarcasm. You show up now after I've built an entire life without you, after I've learned to survive on my own, after I've made my career fighting the kind of corporate corruption that apparently, according to Stella, is what started all this. You show up now and expect what? Gratitude? Understanding? I expect nothing, Noreen said. I gave up the right to expect anything from you the night I left. But I need you to listen, because what you're investigating, Silver Peak Resources, they've killed before. They tried to kill me. They tried to kill my best friend, and now they're targeting you because you're getting close to exposing them. Your best friend? Lily's expression shifted slightly. Stella mentioned someone named Jolene. Said she died in 1993, that her death is what made you run. Jolene Marsh. She was a graduate student, like me. We were investigating illegal dumping by what was then called Intermountain Resources. We found evidence of systematic contamination, falsified reports, payoffs to officials. The night before we were going to present our findings, Jolene went to the mining site alone. She was found dead the next morning. Ruled an accident. But it wasn't an accident. And you have proof of this? I have testimony from the man who threatened me after Jolene died. I have the research we compiled. I have an audio recording Jolene made the night before she was killed, naming names and documenting evidence. Noreen pulled out her phone, the one Jolene had left in the coffin. And I have something else, something I learned 2 days ago that changes everything. Before she could continue, there was a knock at the door. Malcolm entered, looking grave. We need to talk. All of us. There's something you need to see. He set his laptop on the coffee table and pulled up a document, a laboratory report with official letterhead. I had the body exhumed, the one that was buried as Jolene Marsh in 1993. I've been trying to get permission for years, but the family always refused. Until last week, when someone who claimed to be a relative signed the necessary paperwork. I suspect that someone was, actually Jolene herself. Why would you exhume a body? Lily asked. Because I never believed Jolene's death was an accident, and because Noreen just told me Jolene is alive. Malcolm turned the laptop so they could all see the screen. The DNA results came back this morning. The woman buried in Jolene Marsh's grave is not Jolene Marsh. The room went silent. Noreen felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. What? Lily's professional composure cracked. What do you mean it's not her? DNA doesn't match. The body is approximately the right age, right height, but wrong genetic profile, which means someone else died at that mining site. Someone who was then misidentified as Jolene Marsh and buried under her name, either through genuine mistake or deliberate deception. Noreen sank onto the couch, her mind reeling. Then who died? That's what we need to figure out. But this changes everything. If Jolene survived and the company knows she survived, they've spent 30 years looking for her. And if they've found her, or if they think they're close to finding her, they might be desperate enough to eliminate anyone connected to her, including Lily. Wait. Lily held up a hand. You're saying this woman, Jolene, is alive? That she's been alive this whole time? She called me, Noreen said, 2 days ago. She's been hiding, like I have, gathering evidence, watching the company, waiting for the right moment to surface. And that moment is now, because you're investigating the same crimes we uncovered 3 decades ago. Because history is repeating itself, and this time we have a chance to stop it. Lily looked between Noreen, Stella and Malcolm, her expression cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally, reluctant acceptance. This is insane. This sounds like something from a bad thriller novel. I know it does, Noreen said, but it's true, all of it. And I need you to believe me, because your life depends on it. Where is she, this Jolene person? I don't know exactly. She's somewhere in the Bitterroot range. She left me clues, a trail to follow. But before I go looking for her, I needed to warn you. I needed to tell you the truth. Lily was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, more vulnerable. If all this is true, if you really left to protect me, if this company really killed someone and covered it up, if I'm really in danger, then I need to know everything, every detail, every piece of evidence you have. Because I'm not going to hide. I'm not going to stop my investigation. But I need to know what I'm up against. Noreen met her daughter's eyes. Then sit down. This is going to take a while. Over the next 2 hours they laid it all out, the original research, the threats, the decision to disappear. Malcolm played the audio recording Jolene had made. Stella filled in details about raising Lily, about the lies she'd told to protect Noreen's secret. And slowly, piece by piece, Lily's anger transformed into understanding. So what do we do now? Lily asked finally. We find Jolene, Noreen said. We combine her evidence with yours, with the historical record, and we make it public in a way they can't bury. And we do it carefully, because these people have already killed once. They won't hesitate to kill again. Then I'm coming with you. Lily's voice was firm. To find Jolene, to get the evidence, to finish what you and she started. Lily, it's too dangerous. You don't get to protect me anymore. Lily's expression was fierce. You gave up that right when you left. But what you can do is teach me how to survive. You've lived in the wilderness for 30 years. I need those skills if I'm going to help bring these people down. Noreen looked at her daughter, strong, determined, fearless, and saw herself at 23, saw Jolene, saw all the women who'd refused to back down from fights that needed fighting. All right, she said. Then we go together, mother and daughter. Let's finish this. The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Sheriff Vernon Pike showed up at Stella's door just after dawn, hat in hand, looking like a man who'd been carrying guilt for 30 years and finally found a way to set it down. I heard Noreen Caldwell was back, he said without preamble. I need to talk to her. Noreen recognized him immediately, though he'd aged considerably since 1993. Back then, he'd been a young deputy, ambitious and certain of his righteousness. Now he was in his mid-50s, his face lined with the kind of weariness that came from seeing too much injustice and being able to stop too little of it. "Sheriff," she said carefully, "I remember you. You wanted to question me about Jolene's death. I wanted to arrest you." Pike's honesty was startling. "I was convinced you were involved somehow. Young, stupid, too sure of my instincts, and not nearly careful enough about the evidence. I pushed hard for the investigation to focus on you as a suspect. When you disappeared, I took that as confirmation of guilt. And now I've been sheriff for 12 years, and in those 12 years, I've watched Silver Peak Resources, formerly Intermountain Resources, operate with impunity. Watched them contaminate water sources, bribe officials, threaten anyone who asked questions. Watched them do exactly what I suspect they did in 1993, except I'm older now and I know how to read the patterns. He looked directly at Noreen. I was wrong about you. I'm here to say that, and to help if you'll let me. Malcolm, who'd spent the night on Stella's couch, appeared from the kitchen with coffee. What changed your mind? 3 weeks ago, someone broke into Lily Caldwell's office, took her files, her computer, everything related to her Silver Peak investigation. She filed a police report. I looked into it, found security footage of the break-in. The men who did it were professionals, wearing gloves, knew exactly what they were looking for. One of them I recognized from an old case, a fixer who works for corporate clients with problems that need to disappear. You didn't arrest him? Lily asked, appearing in the doorway. I tried. Company lawyers had him out on bail before the paperwork was filed. Charges got dropped 2 days later due to insufficient evidence, even though we had him on video. Pike's jaw tightened. That's when I started pulling old files. Started looking at patterns of deaths and disappearances near Silver Peak operations going back 40 years. Started connecting dots I should have connected 3 decades ago. And what dots did you connect? Noreen asked. Pike pulled a folder from his jacket. 11 suspicious deaths over 40 years. All of them people who had evidence of contamination or were investigating the company. All of them ruled accidents or natural causes. All of them suspiciously convenient timing. I can't prove murder in court, but the pattern is unmistakable. He spread photographs on the table, faces of people who died too young, reports that raised more questions than they answered. And there, in the middle of the pile, was the report on Jolene Marsh's death from 1993. I looked at this case again after 30 years, Pike said. Really looked at it. The body was found at the base of a cliff, consistent with a fall. But the coroner's report noted injuries that didn't quite match the fall pattern. Defensive wounds on the hands, bruising around the throat that suggested strangulation, details that got buried in the final ruling because it was easier to call it an accident. Someone else died there, Malcolm said. We just got DNA results. The body buried as Jolene Marsh isn't Jolene. Pike absorbed this information with remarkable calm. Then we have a murder, a cover-up, and 30 years of corporate corruption to unravel. And I'm guessing you folks have a plan for doing exactly that. We're working on it, Noreen said. But we need more than circumstantial evidence and old recordings. We need something current, something that directly ties Silver Peak's current operations to the historical crimes. And we need to find Jolene. I can help with that. Pike pulled out his phone, showing a map with several marked locations. These are sites where anonymous tips have led to discoveries of illegal dumping over the past 5 years, all in remote areas of the Bitterroot Range. All carefully documented with photographs and samples that found their way to environmental groups. I've been tracking the pattern, trying to figure out who's been feeding this information. Malcolm leaned forward, studying the map. These locations form a perimeter, like someone's patrolling a territory, documenting violations as they find them. Exactly. And at the center of that perimeter is an old fire lookout tower, abandoned since the 70s. Officially. But I took a helicopter flyover last month on an unrelated search, and I saw signs of habitation, smoke from a chimney, solar panels, a vegetable garden. Someone's living up there. Noreen felt her pulse quicken. That's where she is. That's where Jolene's been hiding. If we're going to coordinate this properly, Pike said, we need to move fast but carefully. Silver Peak has been getting nervous. Gordon Latimer has been asking questions around town, putting pressure on people. I think he knows something's happening, that all his old secrets are about to surface. They spent the morning planning. Rumem, Malcolm would prepare a comprehensive story with all the evidence, ready to publish simultaneously across multiple outlets. Pike would work behind the scenes to ensure law enforcement was ready to make arrests the moment the story broke. Stella would coordinate with other environmental lawyers, building a legal team to file immediate injunctions against Silver Peak's operations, and Noreen and Lily would go to the fire lookout tower together. "Are you sure about this?" Stella asked Noreen privately while Lily was gathering supplies. "Taking her into the wilderness, into potentially dangerous territory?" "I'm sure I can't stop her," Noreen replied. "And I'm sure that if she's going anyway, I'd rather be with her. Maybe this is the only chance I'll get to be her mother, even for a few days." The trek to the fire lookout would take 2 days through difficult terrain. Noreen spent the afternoon teaching Lily basic wilderness skills, how to pack efficiently, how to read topographic maps, how to move through forest without leaving obvious traces. Lily was a quick study, absorbing information with the same focused intensity she probably brought to legal research. "You're good at this," Noreen said as Lily adjusted her pack straps with the competence of someone who understood the importance of weight distribution. "I've done some backpacking," Lily admitted. "Nothing like what you've done, but I'm not completely unprepared. I've always loved the mountains. Stella used to say, 'I inherited that from you.'" It was the first time Lily had acknowledged any connection between them beyond biology. Noreen felt something loosen in her chest. "Your father loved the mountains too," she said quietly. "He was a geologist. That's how we met, actually. Both of us studying earth science, both of us convinced we could make a difference." "What happened to him?" "He died 6 months before you were born. Car accident. Sudden, senseless. The kind of death that doesn't fit into any narrative. Just gone." Noreen swallowed hard. "You never got to meet him, and he never got to meet you. But he would have been proud of what you're doing. Fighting for environmental justice. That's exactly what he believed in." Lily was quiet for a moment. "Stella told me about him, but she didn't know much. Just that he died before I was born, and that you loved him. I've always wondered what he was like. He was kind, patient, the kind of person who believed in people's fundamental goodness, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. He balanced me out. I was always too quick to assume the worst, to see conspiracies and corruption. He taught me to look for the humanity in people, even the ones I disagreed with. I wish I'd known him." "Me too. I wish a lot of things had been different." Noreen adjusted her own pack. "But we don't get to rewrite the past. We just get to decide what we do with the present." They set out the next morning, just after dawn. Malcolm and Pike would stay behind, coordinating with legal teams and preparing for the media blitz that would follow once they had all the evidence. Stella hugged both of them fiercely, making Noreen promise to keep Lily safe. "I've kept that promise for 30 years, Noreen said. "I'm not going to break it now." The first day of hiking was mostly silent. Lily followed Noreen's lead, watching how she moved through the forest, learning to read the post landscape the way Noreen had learned over 3 decades. When they made camp that evening in a sheltered valley, Lily finally spoke. "I've been angry at you my whole life," she said, stirring the small fire Noreen had built. "I used to imagine what I'd say if I ever met you, all the ways I'd make you understand how much it hurt, being abandoned. But now that you're here, now that I understand why you left, I don't know what to feel." "You're allowed to be angry," Noreen said. "You're allowed to hate me if that's what you need. I took 30 years from us that we can never get back. I don't hate you. I think I want to because it would be simpler. But I look at you, and I see someone who made an impossible choice and then lived with the consequences of that choice every single day. That's not a villain. That's just someone who was out of options and did the best she could. Thank you for that, even if I don't deserve it. Maybe you do. Maybe we both do deserve a chance to figure out who we are to each other, beyond the genetics and the history." Lily looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Stella told me you used to recite constellation names to me when I was a baby, that you'd hold me up to the window and point out stars and tell me their stories. I did, every night. I wanted you to grow up knowing the sky, knowing there were things bigger and older than our small problems. Teach me now. Show me what you showed me then. So Noreen did, pointing out constellations and telling their stories, and for a little while they were just two people under an infinite sky, connected by blood and love, and the tentative hope that maybe, somehow, they could build something new from the ruins of the past. The next day, they reached the fire lookout tower just before noon. Smoke rose from the chimney, thin and grey against the clear sky. Someone was home. Noreen and Lily approached cautiously, Noreen's hand raised in a gesture of peace. The tower door opened before they reached it, and a woman stepped out, weathered, lean, with silver hair pulled back in a braid and eyes that held 3 decades of watching and waiting. Jolene Marsh, older but unmistakably alive, looked at Noreen and smiled. "Took you long enough," she said. "I was starting to think I'd have to leave more obvious clues." And then they were embracing, 30 years of separation collapsing into a single moment of reunion, while Lily stood watching, beginning to understand the depth of history she'd stumbled into. The fire lookout tower was smaller than Noreen had expected, a single room perched high above the forest with windows on all sides. But Jolene had made it a home and, more importantly, a command center. The walls were covered with maps, photographs, documents connected by string in patterns that told a story of decades-long investigation. Evidence organized with meticulous care. "I've been tracking them," Jolene said, gesturing to the walls. "Every illegal dump site, every falsified report, every payoff, every threat. 30 years of documentation, and I finally have enough to bury them." Noreen studied the evidence, recognizing patterns from their original research, but seeing how it had expanded, deepened, become something far more comprehensive than what they'd uncovered in 1993. "This is remarkable work. It's been my life." Jolene's voice carried no bitterness, just simple fact. "After I woke up in that hospital, after I realized what they'd tried to do, I knew I had 2 choices: run away and let them win, or stay and fight from the shadows. I chose to fight. Why didn't you contact me?" The question came out sharper than Noreen intended. "Why let me think you were dead?" "Because you had Lily. You had something to live for beyond this fight. And I thought," Jolene's voice cracked slightly, "I thought if you believed I was dead, you'd let it go. You'd build a new life somewhere safe. I didn't want you spending 30 years doing what I've done, obsessing over justice that might never come. So you spent 30 years alone instead. We both did, didn't we? Just in different ways." Jolene met Noreen's eyes. "But we're together now, and this time, we finish it." Lily had been examining the documents, her lawyer's eye picking out details. "This evidence is extraordinary. You have internal memos, financial records, medical data showing cancer clusters. How did you get access to all this?" "I've had help over the years, whistleblowers mostly, people who worked for Silver Peak and couldn't live with what they were part of. They'd leak documents, send anonymous packages. I'd verify the information, document it, make sure it got to the right people." Jolene pointed to a thick journal on the table. "It's all recorded there. Every source, every piece of evidence, every step of the investigation. That's my insurance policy." Noreen picked up the journal, its leather cover worn from years of use. She opened it to a random page and saw Jolene's handwriting, neat, precise, filling every line with observations and evidence. 30 years of solitary work, compiled day by day. As she flipped through the pages, a date caught her eye. Yesterday, the most recent entry. She read it, and her blood went cold. "Jolene, what is this? What's what?" "This entry. You're planning to go to the original mining site. You're planning to confront Latimer there and live stream the whole thing." Noreen's voice rose. That's a suicide mission. Jolene's expression hardened. It's the only way. We need to force his hand, make him react publicly where he can't hide behind lawyers and shell companies. If I confront him with all the evidence, if I make him answer for what he's done, the whole world will be watching. He'll have nowhere to run. He'll kill you. Noreen set the journal down carefully, trying to control her rising panic. That's what you're actually planning. You're going to sacrifice yourself to expose him. If that's what it takes. No. The word came out flat, final. Absolutely not. We're not doing this. Noreen. You've survived 30 years. You've gathered all this evidence, built this case brick by brick. You're not throwing your life away now, not when we're this close to actually winning. Lily had been reading the journal entry over Noreen's shoulder. She has a point, though. We need Latimer to incriminate himself. We need him to admit, on record, what the company has done. Otherwise, it's just documents that his lawyers will claim are forgeries or taken out of context. Then we find another way, Noreen insisted. We coordinate with Pike, with Malcolm. We make sure everyone is protected before we make any moves. There's no time for that. Jolene pulled out her phone, showing them a series of text messages. I've been receiving threats for the past week. Someone knows I'm here. They've tracked me down, and they're planning to move against me. If I don't act now, I'll be dead anyway. At least this way, my death means something. Noreen grabbed Jolene's shoulders. Your death doesn't mean anything if we all end up dead. If Latimer kills you on camera, he'll disappear. He'll hide behind corporate structures, claim self-defense, make you look like a dangerous stalker. You know how this works. You've watched them do it for 30 years. So what do you suggest? We go together, all three of us. We bring Pike with backup, ready to move in. We live stream from a safe distance while getting him on record. We don't give him a chance to make this about one unstable woman with a grudge. We make it about evidence, about justice, about 3 generations of women who refuse to stay silent. Jolene looked between Noreen and Lily, seeing the determination in both their faces. Finally, she nodded. All right, we do it together. But we do it soon. Tomorrow. Before Latimer realizes we're coordinating and takes steps to protect himself. Tomorrow, Noreen agreed. But we do it smart. No heroic sacrifices. No one dies. We all walk away from this alive. Lily's phone buzzed. She looked at it and went pale. We might not have until tomorrow, Malcolm just texted. Latimer knows I'm with you, and he's coming. They didn't wait for Latimer to come to them. Instead, they went to him, racing against time and danger to reach the original mining site before he could disappear or destroy evidence. Malcolm was already there with his live stream equipment, broadcasting to thousands of viewers. Pike arrived with state police backup, staying just out of sight, but ready to move in. The mining site looked different than Noreen remembered, more overgrown, reclaimed by nature in the decades since operations had officially ceased. But beneath the surface vegetation, the contamination remained. Jolene had soil samples proving it, water tests documenting toxic levels that should have been cleaned up years ago. And there, standing beside a company SUV with 2 security personnel, was Gordon Latimer. He'd aged into authority, silver-haired, expensively dressed, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. When he saw the 3 women approaching, his expression shifted from annoyance to recognition to something like fear. Noreen Caldwell, he said. I'd heard rumors you were back. And Jolene Marsh, or should I say, the woman pretending to be a ghost. No pretending, Jolene said. You tried to kill me 30 years ago. You failed. And now I'm here to make sure everyone knows what you did. I have no idea what you're talking about. You're clearly disturbed, making wild accusations. Save it for the cameras. Lily stepped forward, holding up a sealed container. This is contaminated soil from this site, collected this morning. It contains levels of heavy metals and carcinogens that are literally off the charts. Your company has been dumping here for 40 years, and you've done nothing to remediate the damage. That's not, you can't prove. We can prove everything. Noreen held up Jolene's journal. 30 years of documentation, internal memos with your signature, financial records showing payoffs, medical records of people who died from cancers caused by your contamination, and testimony from the women you tried to silence. Latimer looked at his security personnel, then at the cameras Malcolm had positioned to capture every word. His face hardened. You think this means anything? I have lawyers. I have connections. I have resources you can't imagine. Whatever evidence you think you have, it will disappear. Just like you should have disappeared 30 years ago. Is that a confession? Pike stepped into view, badge visible. Because it sounds like you just admitted to attempting murder and corporate malfeasance on camera. Latimer's composure finally cracked. You don't understand. The company was worth billions. Hundreds of jobs depended on those operations. We couldn't let a couple of idealistic graduate students destroy that. We couldn't. He stopped, realizing what he'd just said. The cameras had caught every word. You couldn't let us expose the truth, Jolene finished for him. So you killed someone, murdered a woman and buried her under my name. You tried to kill me. You threatened Noreen and her infant daughter. And you've spent 30 years covering it up, continuing the same practices, poisoning more communities, causing more deaths. All for profit. Who died at this site? Noreen demanded. Who did you bury as Jolene? Latimer's face had gone grey. He looked at his lawyers, at the cameras, at the growing crowd of law enforcement moving in. I want immunity. I'll tell you everything, but I want immunity. You're not in a position to negotiate, Pike said. Gordon Latimer, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, environmental crimes, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent. As Pike read him his rights, other officers moved in to arrest the security personnel and secure the scene. Malcolm's live stream was being shared thousands of times per minute. Major news outlets were already picking up the story. Silver Peak Resources' stock was plummeting. Noreen, Jolene, and Lily stood together, watching justice finally unfold after 3 decades of waiting. It's over, Jolene said quietly. It's actually over. Not quite. Lily pulled out her phone, showing a text from her legal team. We're filing injunctions against all Silver Peak operations in Montana, demanding immediate cleanup of contaminated sites and compensation for affected communities. This is just the beginning of holding them accountable. But the part where we live in fear, Noreen said, the part where we hide and run and sacrifice everything for the truth, that part is over. Jolene reached for Noreen's hand, then Lily's. The 3 women stood connected, 3 generations and 3 decades of struggle finally converging into something that looked like victory. As officers led Latimer away in handcuffs, he looked back at them one last time. You won't win, he said. The company has too much power. They'll find a way. They already lost, Lily said. The moment we decided to stop being silent, they lost. Everything else is just details. And watching him disappear into a police car, Noreen finally felt the weight she'd carried for 30 years begin to lift. 3 months later, Noreen stood at the dedication ceremony for the Marsh Caldwell Environmental Research Station, watching young scientists and activists gather to celebrate the opening of a facility built on the ruins of what had once been corruption and death. Malcolm's story had sparked a national investigation. Silver Peak Resources filed for bankruptcy within 2 weeks, its executives facing criminal charges. Gordon Latimer was awaiting trial for murder. They'd identified the woman buried as Jolene, a prostitute named Teresa Quinn who'd been killed to provide a body, a woman with no family to ask questions, chosen because she was vulnerable and disposable. Her family, once they were located, finally got closure and justice. The contaminated sites were being cleaned up, funded by the liquidation of Silver Peak's assets. Communities that had suffered for decades were receiving compensation. New regulations were being written. It wasn't perfect, justice rarely was, but it was real progress, the kind Noreen and Jolene had dreamed of 30 years ago. Jolene stood beside her now, dressed in clothes that looked uncomfortable on someone who'd spent 3 decades in wilderness gear. She was testifying regularly, traveling between courtrooms and legislative hearings, becoming the face of environmental justice advocacy. She'd even written a book about her years in hiding, gathering evidence. The advance was enough to fund the research station they were dedicating today. "I never thought I'd see this," Jolene said quietly. "When I was up in that tower, alone with my journals and my evidence, I thought maybe it would all be for nothing, that I'd die and someone would find my work, and maybe it would matter then. But this people, actually caring, actually making changes, I didn't let myself hope for this." "We did it," Noreen said. "Finally, we did." Jolene squeezed her hand. "All of us. Together." Lily was at the podium now, giving a speech about environmental justice and the importance of protecting whistleblowers and the long road to accountability. She spoke with confidence and passion, and Noreen felt pride swell in her chest, complicated pride, tangled with regret and loss and love, but pride nonetheless. After the ceremony, after the photographs and interviews and handshakes, the 4 of them, Noreen, Lily, Jolene, and Stella, gathered for dinner at Stella's house. It had become a weekly tradition, these family dinners. Awkward at first, everyone navigating the strange territory of rebuilding relationships from fragments and silence. But slowly, meal by meal, they'd found their rhythm. "Pike called," Stella announced as she brought out plates. "The trial date is set for next spring. They want all of you to testify." "We'll be there," Jolene said. "All of us." "How are you doing with that?" Lily asked Noreen. "The idea of testifying, being in a courtroom, having your story told publicly?" Noreen considered the question, terrified, but also ready. "I spent 30 years hiding because I was afraid. I'm done being afraid." "Good," Lily smiled, and Noreen saw echoes of her younger self in that expression, fierce, determined, uncompromising. "Because I need your help with something. The research station needs a wilderness expert to teach field methodology courses, someone who knows how to survive in remote areas, how to conduct research without modern amenities, how to really see what's happening in the environment. You want me to teach? I want you to share what you know. You spent 30 years becoming one of the most knowledgeable wilderness experts in Montana. That knowledge shouldn't stay locked up in the mountains. It should be passed on." Noreen felt tears building but didn't try to stop them. "I'd like that. And I need a place to stay," Jolene added. "The book tour has been exhausting, and I'm too old for hotel rooms and airports. I thought maybe if you were willing, we could find a place together. Something with land. Somewhere remote, but not isolated. Somewhere we could both have space but not be alone." "I'd like that too," Noreen said. "Very much." Stella raised her glass. "To family, however we define it, however we build it, however long it takes to get there." "To family," they echoed, glasses clinking. After dinner, Noreen and Lily walked in the backyard, under stars that looked different from city edges than they did from mountain peaks, but were beautiful nonetheless. "I've been thinking about something," Lily said. "About my name. About whether I want to keep being Lily Caldwell or become Lily Caldwell Marsh. To honor both of you, what you did, what you sacrificed." "You don't have to do that," Noreen said quickly. "You've made your own name, your own reputation. You don't need to carry ours." "I want to. Because you're right that I made my own name, built my own career. But I did that because of what you taught me, both of you, even though you weren't there to teach it directly. The determination, the commitment to justice, the refusal to back down from fights that matter. I got that from you. Both of you. and I want to acknowledge it." Noreen pulled her daughter into an embrace, feeling the solid reality of her, this woman she'd missed becoming but who'd become remarkable anyway. "Your father would be so proud of you. I'm so proud of you." "I know. Stella told me you said that. She tells me a lot of things you say, actually. I think she's worried we won't talk to each other if she doesn't facilitate." "Are we talking? Really talking?" "We're getting there. It's not easy, and some days I'm still angry about the 30 years we lost. But we have now. We have whatever comes next. And I'd rather spend that time building something than mourning what we can't change." They stood together under the stars, mother and daughter, connected by blood and loss and the fragile, tentative hope of healing. It wasn't the life Noreen had imagined 30 years ago, when she'd fled into the mountains with a baby and a broken heart. It wasn't the family she'd once had, but it was real, and it was theirs, and maybe that was enough. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Noreen sat on the porch swing, listening to the quiet sounds of the neighborhood. So different from the wilderness silence she'd known for decades. But not bad, just different. Her phone buzzed, the same phone Jolene had left in the coffin, which Noreen had kept as a memento and connection. A text from Lily: "Heading to the research station tomorrow. Want to come with me? We could start planning your curriculum." Noreen smiled and typed back, "I'll be there." She looked up at the stars, the same stars she'd shown Lily as an infant, the same stars that had guided her through 30 years alone, the same stars that would shine on whatever came next. Some things changed, some things didn't, and some things, lost for decades, could be found again if you were willing to face the past and fight for the future. The coffin in the frozen lake had been Jolene's message. The past can't stay buried forever. But it was also a promise. When the ice finally breaks, when the thaw finally comes, what's been preserved beneath the surface can emerge into the light. Noreen had emerged. Jolene had emerged. And together, with Lily and Stella and everyone, they'd fought alongside. They'd turned 30 years of silence into something that mattered. The frozen lake had thawed. The coffin had been opened. And what came out after the tears, after the grief, after the long road to justice, was hope.